here for day 2 in our conversations, and just so grateful and happy to see him again. His Holiness, what you see before you are the students who are doing Buddhist Studies at the university. So some of them are students in the Divinity School, some of them are students in Arts and Sciences, and they're primarily master's students and PhD students, and several of the faculty in Buddhist Studies. And as you may have heard from me already, that His Holiness is here for 2 reasons. One is to, this is my rendition of why he's here. One is to give teachings and blessings to us and our school and our programs, but also he's here to learn, to try to understand how Buddhism is being studied in a university, how religion is being studied in a university, and how also many other issues about ethics and environmentalism and so on are being studied in the university. So my hope today, the purpose of this meeting was for him to be able to speak with the students in Buddhist Studies. And I had 2 ideas, 2 items on the agenda. One is I wanted to ask the faculty who are here and the doctoral students who are here to maybe each say a little bit about the kind of work that they're doing. And maybe each of us will speak for 2 minutes or so. And you also, His Holiness, if you have questions, just so you can see the kind of projects that people are doing. And then after that, and we do have at least a nice amount of time. We're here till 11:30. And so at least one of the questions then I wanted to ask you, His Holiness, and especially for this group, is this historic move that you have made to try to now to begin to make happen the ordination of Bikunis in the Tibetan tradition. If we could ask you, we're very much interested in that. We have been following this issue for a long time in the Buddhist world. So maybe we could, after we've introduced ourselves, we could talk about that a little. And then I'm sure students in the audience might have some more questions. And so, not to be egotistical, but just to get off in terms of the kind of thing I have in mind, I'm going to start myself first, just to give you a model of what I was hoping you would do. And especially for the faculty, I'm hoping if you would talk about just a little bit about the kind of work you're doing, and also, if you choose, really whatever you want to say, but something about your teaching, the types of teaching that you're doing. So I myself would like to tell His Holiness 2 things. The first is that I just finished a project that I was working actually a long time on Tibetan medicine, Sorripa, and I actually had with me a scholar from Tibet, he's from the Sori Latra Chimol in Lhasa, who helped me to read some of these material, and I finally wrote a book. The purpose of the book was really to explore how, everybody who studies Tibetan culture and Tibetan Buddhism always are saying everything about Tibet is Buddhism, Buddhism, Buddhism. And in one way that's true. In another way, I felt it's important to also see there were other traditions, other intellectual traditions in Tibet that were not 100% about Buddhism. And actually, historically, so I'm sure you know that, for example, the Gyushi, the root text of Tibetan medicine, there was a long debate by Tibetan scholars. Is this really the word of the Buddha or not? And I'm not taking sides, I'm not saying, but for me it's interesting that Tibetan scholars were raising such a question. And so I tried to track that history in this book. I really enjoyed it very much, and it's completely finished, and I'm a very happy person because it's finished. In my teaching, I teach a lot, of course, on Buddhism, but the one thing I wanted to tell you about is I have a hope in the future. I want to teach a course, and this is a crazy idea, and I'm not sure if it's about Buddhism, but I want to teach a course to train myself and students to how to recognize the intelligence of animals. I have in my mind just that even the whole course could be we're watching videos of how animals interact with each other to, to train your vision to be able to see how brilliant that they are, and to then try to raise consciousness that animals are not just dumb creatures who you can just use, but they're actually sometimes, I think, more intelligent than human beings. So that's me. Okay. Then I want to turn to some of my colleagues first, faculty, Professor Hallisey. If you could say something about what you've been doing and your teaching and your thoughts.
I am a student of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, and I work on all kinds of areas of Buddhism there, but especially on the poetry that Buddhist monks have written over the many centuries. I know that His Holiness himself is a poet, so part of understanding how poetry reveals certain important aspects of the religious life. In my teaching here at Harvard Divinity School, I do two things. One is I always am teaching students about all of us trying to learn how to read Buddhist scriptures. In particular, the way that you referred to yesterday about the four reliances. For us to learn how to read, that we see the spirit of the teaching, not just the letter of the teaching. Not to make the teaching only something exotic, but something that is for us today and tomorrow. The other area that I also teach about is in Buddhist ethics. And so when you referred to yesterday about the innate compassion that children have, in many ways this is part of where my courses on Buddhist ethics are always beginning of what kind of person are we that allows us to be moral persons.
Thank you. I want to turn to Professor Shanghai Li. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Shanghai Li. I'm a postdoc here, but I'm also teaching courses. I think it was 2008. I was visiting Central Institute of Tibetan Studies. Your Highness came and gave a talk. I was in the audience. It was very nice to attend your talks. And I studied, for my research, I did some work in Central Institute of Tibetan Studies, then also in Biological Bay. And the topic of my study is scripture. So I think it's a big topic in religious studies, but not so much in Buddhism. And so what I'm looking at is mainly the Madhyamika text from India. So looking particularly at Chandrakirti and looking at his Umetenjo Madhyamika text and how scriptures are cited, and also looking at these different concepts of scriptures, such as Agama and also Shastra, Long and Denju, these different concepts, and also looking at basically how scriptures are used in the texts. There's some of the interesting questions that interest me is one is how, like in Tibet, it seems like there's not too much reading of sutras, whereas in the earlier Indian texts, like in Chandrakirti and Bhava Vega's text, there are a lot of citations of sutras. So what is the process by which perhaps sutras becomes less important later in Tibetan Buddhism? And another question that interests me is what is the role of the early Buddhist scriptures, the Hinayana Buddhist scriptures in the text? Chandrakirti, Buddhabharita, and also Nagarjuna seems to have cited a lot of the early Buddhist scriptures, the Samyukta Nikaya, those early texts. So looking at basically what is the role of scripture, and also the relationship between scripture and reason, Long and Lipa. What is exactly the relationship between these two elements in the texts? In terms of teaching, I'm visiting just for 2 years, teaching various courses on basically Indian Buddhism, I would say. So history of Indian Buddhism. I taught a course on Madhyamika philosophy, then also a course on Chandrakirti. There's another course that I taught was on Buddhist literature, and so I was very happy to hear that you composed a Nataka, a drama, which I would like to read at some point in the future. Thank you.
Just want to see, of course, if you have any questions. So is Professor Willa Miller? Is she? Yes. Yes, she is. Yeah. Could you talk about your teaching and also the in detail about the doctoral dissertation that you did? She finished her dissertation at Harvard a couple of years ago.
So I'm
Could you stand, or speak loud?
yeah. So I'm the visiting lecturer on Buddhist ministry here at the Divinity School, and I am, for the last couple of years, I've been teaching classes on practical applications of meditation and Buddhist philosophy and theology to modern American contexts. But I've also been working lately on turning my dissertation into a book, and the dissertation was on the work of Gyalwa Karmapa and his book Dorje Luji Beishe on the subtle body. So I'm really interested in this question of, in my own training, it was always Buddhism is about the mind and about the nature of mind and how the mind works. And for me, it was a revelation to stumble on a text where a Buddhist theorist and thinker is talking only about the body and how the body is an awakening vessel, an actual door to enlightenment. So for me, that's a really interesting area of exploration. That's what I think.
Yes. Thank you.
Are there any other faculty members here? Beatrice, Crystal, please. If you'd say both your teaching and your dissertation.
My name is Beatrice Crystal. I teach Pali in the Divinity School. I'm teaching first year this year, but hopefully first and second year ongoingly, and hopefully sharing the pleasure with people of reading those texts. My dissertation was on a biography of the Buddha in Pali written in Thailand, and how very skillfully the text sort of creates emotional responses and ethical responses in the reader to the Buddha. And if I may just make so bold, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your attention to animals. That's something that I believe very, very passionately is incredibly important, and I think the West, well, you can't just say to the West, but it's something so important, and I'm really glad you're bringing attention to it. Thank you for that.
Excuse me if I don't go exactly right in pecking order, but Michael Sheehy, can you speak? He's not actually a faculty here, but he's our colleague at TBRC, but he has a big research, so maybe talk about your personal research project.
Sure. My own interests are really in the history of Buddhism, in particular in Tibet. My work has really been, for the last several years, on the Jonang tradition and history of Zhentong thinking, Zhentong literature. But my broad... What is Zhentong? It's, let's say, one string of thought, contemplative and philosophical thought that emerged out of discourse in Tibet, intellectual discourse, from the 14th century, specifically about this idea of Buddha nature. But of course, my work and interest is most broadly in Tibetan literature and really historical literature in particular.
You're writing a book? Can you tell them?
I have a few book projects, two actually. One is on really history of the Jonang, history of the Jonang tradition in Tibet, and also I've been translating one of Taranatha's students, Namtar's, who are female, Trinley Wangma.
Michelle Martin, do you want to say something about your work?
Let's see, I did most of my Tibetan work outside of academia, but and right now I'm just... Sorry. Okay, most of my work has been, my graduate work was in comparative literature at Yale, so that's been my background for translating work. I studied Tibetan mainly in Nepal, and I'm working on a book now with wisdom on the 5 Kagyu forefathers and the 17 Karmapas.
So all of the adults have speakers now. Okay. So now I would like to turn to the doctoral students who are here, who are working on a variety of projects, and maybe may I turn first to Elizabeth Monson?
Do you want me to stand?
Yes, yeah, and speak loudly.
Okay. I have been working on the Sangnam of Bikuni and have translated that. I was in Bhutan for a couple of years doing research and receiving aid in reading this text, which is quite difficult. I think I've heard that you might know this text. But we produced a translation in English that's been published in Bhutan. But my current research then is using the translation and the original Tibetan text of Bikuni. Then I've been doing an analysis of how this particular kind of writing and the variety of the different forms of writing that are contained within the Sangnam are working to create a certain kind of person for the reader, and as well as a kind of technology of the self for the writer, or the imagined writer, shall we say. So it's been a really interesting project. I think that's a wonderful text, and I'm very interested in how the use of language, especially through writing poetry, writing songs, writing any kind of narrative text, or even a didactic text, actually works to create an ethical person in the process of doing that, and how that can make those kinds of texts extremely relevant for how we are living today, how we're existing today. So that's my current research project.
Thank you so much. And actually, I'm sorry that I passed over Ani Damshu, who His Holiness knows very well, but I think the audience here would love to hear about your work, and especially your doctoral dissertation, if you don't mind to tell us a few words. Can you stand up, please, and tell us about your PhD you got at Wisconsin, so we understand you.
I'm sure I studied with Charles Hallisey. My doctoral dissertation was on looking at the ethical formation of a person, specifically through gender and narrative, looking at the narratives, the life stories of the direct disciples, of the female disciples of the Buddha in the Mula Sarvastra Vinaya. Since then, I've been primarily supporting and serving His Holiness on different publication projects.
Are you planning to make that into a book?
If I ever get any time. I am committed to producing a book for Wisdom Publications, translations of the life stories of those nuns.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm hoping to have it published in time for the first fiction ordinations in Melissa Hospital.
That's great. Let me call, please, on Rinchen Ki, who is our visiting doctoral student from the Minzu Dashu University in Beijing. Can you stand, please, and talk about what you're working on? And I don't know if you want to speak in Tibetan and then maybe briefly in English, or you can just speak in English. It's up to you.
I will speak Tibetan, it's okay. Union Chinchisinga, I go down we Lavang Takok, Mako Chinchiko, Chimna Deno, the Chimna, Angla Joa in the Chimnia, Chimsanga Joan, Jungle Passing Chico, Lavang Takuna, Ronkung just an Quadro, Corsio, the D. Lorgia, the Niti. Chokats Hokon and the Decourse in Gentini, Lavang Takuna, Latang Patratan, the Dilorgi Coratini, Dear Tabka Nico Corasin.
So that was her interesting project. Can I call James Wright, who was a more senior student, and talk about your work, please?
I'm in the middle of finishing a dissertation on two men from Kashmir in the 12th century who wrote a lot about, they wrote works that attempted to explain how literature works and how it produces emotions in us and what the value of that is. And one of them was very influenced by a religion centered around the god Shiva, and one of them was very influenced by Dharmakirti's Buddhist system. And so the dissertation is about how these two bodies of thought influence what people think about literature and how what people think about literature influence these two bodies of thought.
Thank you so much. And Ian McCormick, can I call on another non-Christian?
My name is Ian, and I'm a fifth-year PhD student in Tibetan Studies. And my dissertation, which I've just started writing, is about generally Buddhism and politics, and specifically the relationship between Chö and Si in Tibet in the 17th century with the 5th Dalai Lama and the Desi Sangye Gyatso and the Ganden Pochang in the early years. So I'm looking both at the way they think about and talk about Chö and Si and their relationship, but also more generally about Buddhist thought and ideas more generally, and how they gave them resources for talking and thinking about politics, and also about how the sort of demands and ideas and requirements of politics changed the way that they thought and talked about Buddhist ideas. So more broadly about ritual and conceptions of place and ideas about Lhasa and the Potala, and also ideas like Tulku and how that was talked about with the 5th Dalai Lama.
Thank you so much. And I think Rory.
Sure. I want to start by saying that I'm very much indebted to my father for my interest in Tibetan Buddhism. He actually took refuge with the 16th Karmapa, and that's how his interest in Tibetan Buddhism began. And so in some sense, my being here is very much indebted to Your Holiness in an interesting way. But yeah, my interest is broadly is in the history of the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism. But more specifically, I've been focusing on the history of death ritual, Kunriki Choga, in the Sakya tradition, and thanks to Professor Gyatso, I've started to also look at the writings of Yongopa and the Karling Shitro. And so I'm looking at the development of Kunriki Choga and its relationship with Bardo Chodro tradition, and so how funerary practices developed starting around the 12th century with the writings of Jetsun Trapa Gyaltsen, and going up until around the time of Amesha. And so that's where I'm at now. I'm just beginning the dissertation. But yeah.
And Elizabeth Angalski, I don't see you, but I know you're here.
She's here.
There she is.
My name is Elizabeth Angowski, and I'm I'm also a student of Tibetan Buddhism. And my work has to do with Yeshe Tsogyal's Namtars from the 14th and 15th century. And so what I'm looking at there is not just what she learns in terms of religious cultivation, what kind of text she takes up for any, or the specific contents of the texts, but also the ways in which her emotional cultivation is represented and her relationships with others within the texts, other characters within the text are represented.
She's working on a text that's not the Dachshund Dorje, the famous Namtar Yeshe Tsogyal, the early one, Chidokunga. And then we have Ali Aitken.
My interest is in Madhyamaka philosophy, particularly looking at texts in the Tengyur dealing with the Chikdujal, the neither one nor many argument. I've been working on Sri Gupta's text, Nagunpalbe is Dekonala Chopejapa, and I'm interested in looking at these works also as philosophy, so that these ideas, like the Chikdujal argument and also like the two truths, are understandable to people who maybe are only studying Western philosophy, or and take these ideas seriously as philosophy. Thank you.
We have a lot of doctoral students. Just a few more. Lena Verschary.
Hi, I'm Lena Verschary. I am a fourth-year doctoral student here. I study Chinese Buddhist monastic life. So I do ethnography in modern-day temples, and I study how everyday life in a Buddhist monastery participates in self-moral formation.
What, a little more detail about
it's still very early for me, but
who you're writing about, the group?
yeah. So I study Shuanhua Shangren, contemporary Chinese Buddhist Dharma master. And yeah, I mean, it's very interesting for me personally, not growing up in a Buddhist context, to go spend time in monasteries and try to live with the lay people who are very intense practitioners as well as the nuns, and just have a feeling for how the rhythms of everyday life can really change you.
And who was I looking? Oh, Catherine Hartman.
Hello, my name is Kate, and I'm a second-year Tibetan PhD student in Tibetan Studies. I'm particularly interested in, pardon me for reading, debates about how the experience of physically traveling to a pilgrimage place, particularly the holy mountains of Sari, Lapchi, and Tisei, affected some change on the pilgrim. What are the qualities of a holy place? What are the qualities of an ideal pilgrim? And how do those things work together in order to produce some sort of good experience? In order to do that, I'm looking at Drikung Kagyu writers from the 15th to the 17th century, Kunga Rinchen, and especially Rigzen Chogi Drakpa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And are there any other doctoral students here? Got them all? Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I forgot your name.
Oh,
yes. But please introduce yourself.
I'm Shoko.
Shoko.
I'm from Japan. I finished my degree in Japan and I came to the United States. And now I'm a postdoc researcher here and I'm studying Tibetan history, especially Sakya Pama. And yes, thank you.
And any other doctoral students that I missed, please let me know. And Alexis Bader, who is just going to begin her doctoral career, but so now you're getting the lower, so she doesn't. He doesn't know, but if you could just say what your hopes are. And your
My hopes are to begin doctoral work this fall. I'm interested in the way that story literature and literary techniques function to make Buddhist teachings relevant and convey abstract philosophical ideas across time and place.
So thank you very much, everyone. And is there anyone else here who has a sort of robust project that they're working on they would like to tell His Holiness about? Please forgive me if I'm not seeing you, so don't feel like I've missed you. The other students who are here are master students, many of whom have hopes to go into doctoral programs, and some are also thinking more in terms of Buddhist ministry as opposed to doctoral programs. And of course we have several members of the Buddhist Sangha who are here on a one-year special program, and some of them have now entered the master's program. Maybe we can hear from you as well. Is that okay? Or maybe Venerable Upali, at least, who's now in the master's program. Oh, yes, and you have a gift to give His Holiness. Yes. Please go ahead.
This is a Buddhist monastery where Atisha Dipankar Sri Jana is supposed to have lived. So it's ruins of
Bangladesh?
Yes, Bangladesh. It's my gift on behalf of the Buddhist community and the Center for the Study of World Religions.
Thank you.
Okay, so now, if you don't mind, can we ask you about the Buddhisavasavada Vinaya tradition and how you came to the decision, and also, I know that it's a very complicated question about the Bikuni ordination because some nuns have already been taking full ordination from the Dharmakutaka tradition in Taiwan, and it has now spreading back into Sri Lanka, and also they're trying for it to spread into Thailand, and we know there's been a lot of debate. I was there with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in, I guess, 2008, was it? in Germany when he brought together many, many, many scholars and many, many members of the Buddhist Sangha to talk about this problem. So as much as you can tell us about how you decided and also what the process will be, do you feel it's going to be difficult? I mean, His Holiness Dalai Lama said that the masters of the Tibetan Sangha are quite conservative, and he needs to convince them. So whatever you can tell us about it, and maybe we might ask you some more questions about it.
다 당부들이야 가수에 clearance 말은 니주지 세브소가 들이야 다 녜게 지 결혼마 가수에 되지 결혼에 좀 가수 찬스 말ပဲ다디 녜지 가수 치기 알았어 두 산타 빠지 납 게 자천 버지 생 맞아 버지 녜제스 티기자르도 찬로도 와 그래서 다디 니주 원해선 들라 쳐야 말아요 지단기 네 전주 레지조 나로 조디 경우를 치 우티네 다 디월이야 어느 지 경험에기 꼴이야 어느 지 신주당 안 디토리아 어느 지 가주에 야견나는다 공부 쉬죠 아래 고난적으로 주사만 비rin이야 깔에 접세 지 경험에기 돈발라서 영화 토리미나 안에 고난적이 냠십차다 리서치 하나래 가는 신기 총도 공사 차라서 받다 네 차야래 가는 지 토리미는 관심 강에 망고 시켜주도 차래 이 뒤줄에 댄세 아니 나랑기 뭐네네 고난적들 댄세 경험마사디 계시면 이베지당 야수 체과하고 계시면 이베지 하나 하고 중요해. 이 유전되네 디슈겐되네 총대비치게 되마다베 녜게 당번에 수직이 맞아야지 녜 된세. 아니 아직 수직이 맞아야지 녜 제압을 설치다 들으면서 저거 말해. 이 유전되네 아 당보들이야. 예 경험을 우리 슈베다 간다. 경험에 걸려야지 가지고 역시 나년당 여견나년 3월로야 아랑문에 가지고지 거진 제대해서는 장도 야나지 가지고 프랑스기 도나 프랑스 매비는데 요다 매브르 심베티 클리어런스 제우도스 시마도 깔래 코즈 이게 제쟁에 무슨 저거 말아왔디.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify something, which is that when people say that I'm going to reestablish the Bikshuni ordination in the Tibetan Mula Sarvastivadin tradition, it kind of makes me sound a little bit more central to or more important to this whole process, as though it was something that I initiated and I've been doing on my own, than is really the case. Under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there have been for several decades a great deal of research into how this could be done. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has given great support to this and showed great concern. So there has already been a great deal of hard work on this that before I became particularly involved. But because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's impetus and the hard work that's gone, I've come to recognize the tremendous importance of the reestablishment of the Bikshuni ordination lineage. But it's not like I came up with this idea on my own before anyone else. So I need to clarify this and express my real gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the others who've worked so hard on this. It would be unfitting were they to have done all the hard work and then me claim the credit.
Tatene Gyalwa ki Kashurada ta lugyu tolya pele ji Gyalwa de chungda majung sadi ta ngara gegwen chevina ane pele thoma rojung de tsobe kablia ane rojung poe de da moe de niga chungare de rojung poe moe de chungare de chungare 중 번디가리아 되네 가수에다 개별 그 주모든데 다 개별 주모든데 가시 다 가수래 미세기 야세 매바든데 그 주모든데 도와
올라서
중 주모 samara다 아 근데 제가 디주 러드 중도와 근데 이제 러드 중배 걸 땡땡 지 들어가서 접중 주가 자마이바 기주다 에 결로 말해서 딱 한다 그 rimba chasang ruji zhuyu giri sambar ringa nante dosi yin dana singi an bebo yu nyingba kashiya nalo lea an gelong me di ngma yueba chi ta luju mangbu chi na tyong go re yin bisane ta pyo lea ngamu karo ta tyuru karo la ta tenpa nga dar lea gelong tenpa nga dar da tenpa chidar gi 가수라다 지 고도에서 말해. 대가리야 그런 데지 바지다. 얘도 유지 이제도 체대게. 다이는 제스타 간다 그놈에 대냠제 좀 윤르디 체배.
One of the questions that has arisen, or at least been discussed, regarding the reestablishment of the order of Bhikshunis in Tibet is whether there ever was Bhikshuni ordination, whether it was ever given in Tibet. And I've become quite certain myself that it did exist. It's clear that during the initial or early propagation period, the 8th and 9th centuries, when the ordination, when monastic ordination first began in Tibet, that both men and women were ordained. And there are accounts in that period of some queens or at least royal consorts becoming nuns. And it's clear from the wording of these accounts that they didn't simply receive the primary ordination, but the full ordination. So both the Getsul and the Gelongma or Bhikshuni ordination. Also, in other older Tibetan historical texts, there are many accounts of communities of bhikshunis. So I'm quite certain that both during the early propagation period between the 8th and 11th centuries and during at least the beginning of the later propagation period, the community and the ordination of bhikshunis existed in Tibet, but that somehow the ordination fell into disuse and died out.
Genome dumgyun di chen genome de nyamgo gyumzen karimdi tangazu yabuji shedu yaman jeza di tolena azu da yimji chiada azu chiada mangbushi yora samtang yes.
We don't yet know why it died out, and so that we're continuing to study this and research this, trying to find out.
지당기 벤다 다티 마신 녀롱 다드네 디젤이야 게롬에 도마주니 다지 간사 리송리야 다티 간사르 인디비주얼 데기 말해 간사 리송이야 gelong 드빈데 중요하래 다 돼야 gelong 대매위 인도사는 gelong 파에 될 대기 somewhere the group ke ene gelong me dombateva de risun chunare ta di nane kama ba jeva de da chi da jesa ta de chi yo de pa chi da jes da mares da handa de chi varda kama ba jeva
later on
chi da insara samsara
later on there seem to have been several individual women who requested and received the Bhikshuni ordination. But there were no longer any communities for Bhikshunis, so they may in fact have been ordained along with the Bhikshu ordination. And I feel that probably this occurred during the lifetime of the 8th Gyalwa Karmapa Bhikkhu Dorje.
No, he also gave.
He gave, yeah.
Probably.
That this was probably given by the 8th Karmapa, the Bhikshuni ordination.
다른 신기 보통 초래 남자에게 주변으로 주시하다. 다디 가지고 아주 섬지 도집하고도 군지 당보도 말왜.
올라서. It also seems that Bodong Chula Namjal gave the Bhikshuni ordination to the first Samding Dorje Palmo Rinpoche. She is regarded as the highest female tulku or Nirmanakaya in Tibet.
다가나 들이 망고지야 다디 망고시야 오는 영상 그렇지. 다이네 디 파소 장발 당아서디 민원에 시에는 파소 사로다. 파이 그룹 장발 되는 게놈에도 버텨야디 뒤에기 슝게나 뒤에기다 가주 진조가 나로려야디 다다지 튠의 못인사디 저가 첨부 알아지. 저가 첨부 알아. 저가 망고 알아.
포기 올라서.
오늘 시에나다 포다 모에기 가주 게놈에도 버텨베 걸이야. 지단게 럽중마다 기주마다 게로마다 다디도 상월로 게놈 마게 대치볼 되는 제고 알아. 이내 게놈 매그 도봉 문시디 진배 걸이야. 게놈 파에 되다 게놈 마에 돼 니가론 좀네 진고 알아. 드리드산다 헬이야 마에 돼 매지 파소 치볼 되네 도바 진배들이 중요해 인도산 다디 오늘 전에 돈바 나버 타바지 끼그래다 말에 엔 뒤에기 가주리 지 진주다 퉁그래 말해서디 요런 친구야.
One of the issues or questions that arises is whether, according to the Vinaya, it is permitted for a male monastics, male bhikshus, a community, a preceptor, and other attending bhikshus who are only male, to bestow this ordination of bhikshuni on women. If we look at the Vinaya, it says that the primary ordination, or the Shamanarika, the novitiate, and also the intermediate ordination, which is called Gelokma, or virtuous disciple, can be given by bhikshunis, but that the bhikshuni ordination should be given by an attending preceptors and assistant preceptor community composed of both bhikshus and bhikshunis, which raises the question of if the vow is given by bhikshus alone, will the pure, complete transmission of the vow occur? Is it or is it not permitted by the Vinaya?
안데인주산에 예산블레야다 벽이 gelome ordination data lo mangu진 거치 다가르 줄링 망고치가 윤센데 가라서는 초직네 데 가르에 초직네 셰비나 다지제는 디지 나로를 디제 가와치니 정말로다지 gelome 도마진 가와치니 데 여기 인자 되게 뒤주 망고진 거라서 근데 고삼 거세 데라 윤제 알아서 그냥 초직네 예상 담비미나 아니 미망고지 가르서나 very careful somewhere that number tabaji yaji 저ba 매바지 yaji 다 간다 출루 강가로 그 주의 전부做的 주의 전부 시 다 간다 그做 주의 전부터 official 주의 전부 시서다 간다 되게 정말로 그 저ba 매바지 yaji 연구예빈 다 때문에 주린 야네 안도 지 공롱 균세 아니 야야 가담 아니 야르기 개베 된저다 나는 신기 아니 폐기 개베 된저디 소리야 아니 양내 양도 배 가지고 심주 체제 근데 지금다 넘버 타워죠 아직 네 근데 지금 내 체벌 되네 주주 망고 좀 거실이야다 초진 다 포지티브 돈 쉐비나 근데 지금 돈에 예 삼단계 있습니다 제가 대신 라면에 편도시라 주스다 리서치 망고 싶지 제자 다 간다 니주 차상으로디 하고 돼야지 계속 이제 주주 망고 싶다 매비나 하는 바지 니주 차상으로디 또
I suppose from one point of view, you could say that what's held up the restoration or reestablishment of the Bikshuni ordination in Tibetan Buddhism, what has caused the many years of discussion or debate is that some scholars, some teachers have been against it. But I think from another point of view, to look at it a little more positively, the reason it's taken so long is that we want to be really, really careful that once we reestablish it, it be undisputable in its authenticity, so that it can be universally accepted and officially accepted by all the teachers of all of the four traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And this has involved rigorous and extensive research into both Indian and Tibetan source texts. And so while it's been a delay, I think in a positive sense, we could say that to be positive, that it's enabled us to learn much more about the situation. And I feel this has helped me a great deal because all of the discussion and all of the research has enabled me to really gain an understanding of the entire situation surrounding this ordination.
Very simple somewhere that the Kansas should show that accident somewhere accident you say you got a jump sana you don't see the man kaduri the bugaram je bongo to kaduri you don't see it you don't see lo ya nanga zo di kaju malam da ji duan ro da je and duan the timber so those kids share and then you start and they do the timber so do start energy duan na lo le ya and galon yin bi na galon ge da de chulu chang wa de gu wa de and da ne ji zu la tie na kuran da de chulu chang da de ne galon ma ka shi ja da be galon ma da gaye galon ma ka shi ja da de ne da de mi on da de su kwa sha ro da de su kan de ji khu zo la da ka shu da be na ji seat arrangement 를 제가 고조 과샤를 아 고조 가르 그런 거를 가르쳐 그래서 아주 계제 중으로 안 되네 신의지 경험하다 제 배자도 신의 칼로 하지 띵에는 아시다 인트레스트 계제도 막 보셔야 되고 인트레스트 하면서 아무래도 들래 인트레스트 인트레스트 내대지 아 나는 지금 디듀산에 미규도지 뒤에 레쇼지 레기 쳐가지고 내기 쳐가지고 왔다 디나로래야 아니 별라 gelomegi the group somewhere so they maybe insa 계시 보면지 gelome 동바 신대 중소나 아니 gelom 파이 쳐가 된 루고레 손지다 간다 고랑이 쳐가 차상지 마지 다 가서 초진으로도 해야 제가 되는 때네 미세게다 어다 제 미규도 좀 미세다 난 도서 서로 지다봐
My personal interest in this began for a very simple, one could say accidental reason. In the year 2004, we began the process of bringing the yearly or annual Kagyu Manlam into a full line with the traditions of the monastic Vinaya. So the establishment of the correct seating, order, and rituals, the fully appropriate robes and the wearing of the necessary marks and so forth for both bhikshus and novices or shamaneras. And what came up when we did this was that there were several women, nuns, in the Tibetan tradition who had received bhikshuni ordination already. And questions came up.
It's actually Taiwanese or
Or
Chinese.
Taiwanese. Hola, sir.
They're not Tibetan.
Oh, okay. There were several bhikshunis, and so the question came up, where should they sit, what exactly should they wear, and so on. Well, whereas initially for me it was merely a question of protocol, I quickly became very interested in this when I consulted the 8th Gyalwa Karmapa Mikyu Dorje's manual of Vinaya procedures and ordination rituals. And I found that in it, he writes, since there is no longer a community of bhikshunis, if any woman or group of women wish to receive the bhikshuni ordination, the ordination should be given using the ceremony for bhikshu ordination. And I inferred from this that he was a proponent of this, of the reestablishment of this, and that began my interest.
당임이네 지소 나라로다 가져야지 내주지 가려운데 알았으나 치기가 아닌데도 뭐 가시죠 알아요. 치기 한다. 나 민대 말을 주세요. 딱 하나. 치기 안에 가시죠 알아요. 제가 미망부지 삼례 나라라 베베기 안에 소리야 돼. 인트레스트 하면 돼. 이 치기가 안에 주피는 치료를 주게 있겠지. 땅 아주 지구도 니 구도 숨 구도다. 니세대 알아지. 땅은 니수 돌아 된다지 가서 베베기 주면도 시랑 고쳐. 갤롱마사를 가리. 갤롱마 도바 제나 배영 가리. 맞에네 님이 섬으로까지 교양 가려야 돼 시랑 고쳐. 다 치기에 되지. 다 knowledge를 제가 아주 인트레스트 내면 인사 이제 뭐서지 제가 다디 강의에 가라서나 베베 나라라다지 딱게저 디마인드 없이다메데 제 디마인드 좀 다지 주마드서 쿠란 중에 저와 없이다메데 다 게데 마지 치료하는 거든 제가 energy over the years som다 로마오지는 얘기 내주셔야 찍디 가라서나 아니 베베 주마 소라마 제시 갭세 영어만 사드 가라스다 망보시에 되어래 드린두산다디 고 가라임바 다나 신기 에네 페니 미스나란도 그거 거시에로 되데마 모주 체제 코란 중에네 에너지 셰도 영화지 주 베베 주마 중에 셰도 영화지 베베 주마 중에 인트레스트 영화티 쉬우지 개좀지 자리 열어서 스탠제 모주로 두세요.
Another situation that has affected this is that initially several Western Buddhist nuns demonstrated, Western nuns of Tibetan Buddhism demonstrated a strong interest in the reestablishment of the Bhikshuni vow. And at the time, initially, most Tibetan nuns were not that concerned about it. They'd never really thought of it because it hadn't existed in their society for so long. They didn't really think about the existence of bhikshunis or what it would mean to become a bhikshuni. But whether you can say that the interest by these Western Tibetan Buddhist nuns reminded the Tibetan Buddhist nuns, or that it made them aware of it, in any case, it sparked an interest, so that they began to learn more and more about bhikshuni ordination, what a bhikshuni is, what becoming a bhikshuni means, the benefit of the reestablishment of the Bhikshuni lineage and the problem of not having it. And so that interest has now spread widely among the female Tibetan.
No, not like that.
No?
Not really like that.
Okay.
Okay. I think that means the voice looks like for some of the Tibetan people, they think this is the interest of Western sort of Buddhist nuns. It's not interest of Tibetan Buddhist nuns, because it's always these voices coming from outside, not from inside. That's why they have kind of misunderstanding. That's why I've tried to, over the years, of course, over the years, try to give education for nuns or introduction for nuns, how important the sort of Bhikshuni ordination, what it means, and also what are the sort of good things or beneficial
benefits
about these things. I think I did sort of kind of introducing them and sort of, and also
I've tried to introduce and familiarize them with it.
That ngarang sigaro de karasana de that kesama ushe nan de pengamendusda a jegodos karena baji jegodos kar Bhikshuni ordination chibo mareta nam yune karake shebi na da kesama ushe de da tuju bangbo je chwa chuye za tambo ngazo ngene durin chegwa de mimango zomche 참에 이제 삼자를 둘린 시제. 대샤데 안 가버죠. 인도산 삼자를래. 안다 타마들이야. 시에데 버지 핑도아마 다 라렌 다운. 안 인도산에 제가 아주 팅지량 아주디 다 조디 winter dharma gathering 사 지가로 다 구제를 이게 조아래. 디가려 조다 그주 군주서와도 당문에 제가 감사하면서 되시나 시라래요.
맞어.
다들 인도산 디나로 감사하셔야 할 개보다 셔야 하도 슬레야래. 아주 계속 셔브래. 디건 빅슈니 거 계속 셔브래. 시두산 고주 참에게 다 데베 망 어르셔는 쿠란소지 오늘 조화를 배제. 다들 오늘 전에 디 제고도 다 아주 지 가수에 라수지 제고도스. 이 교랑게 된 제고도스. 그 손도 가려야. 안 캠보다.
라서.
디즈이데 잡아디즈이. 안데 제고도스. 교랑게 디 제고도 지단게 가서 다다바도지 추규 상말로 냠도 루젠 루니만 버체자.
라서.
다이네데 추규 상말로 베 튠바 영화사데. 저밤에 영화사데 가라 합시도. 지 추규 지기 딱 뭐네 지 당부 공부를 배우시. 내가 제비는 걸리걸리 주의신 나저디 미변도 되지. 걸리걸리 지그랬어. 근데 결혼지 제가 못도 알아버래. 안 알아는데 지 심식으로 파지. 마신의 당분에 되지 interest 예외 좋아 예외 또 안다. 그것도 저와 잡이 인상. 딱 한다. 진에 제자는 게 걔네는 또 세버래. 아니 나니 동물수 잡다를 제제. 이나 걔네 세버래 땅에 특급 뒤두산 가라라서 다 뒤주디서 거래서. 갈리갈리 제어를 the right time someone. 다들은 나니 얘도 주실로리아. 아니 가서다지. 다 달로 많다 사는 얘도 주주니. 고주체. 경험만 사대 process 로카신 거로.
알았어.
고주도 신이스라. 아베나 dos landro데 gelon karresan tambo gelon madu konlia gizu tombashore gelon me tombashore gelon me tombo loni sungore dijele gelon me tombachu gelon me tombashu sa jer lo chukjera shini ene pebegi gelon majigi ene kaso gelon me tomba chupcha jingore 제자한테 디가는 아버지 로십지 자자래 다 고대나 아니 영어 잘 들었어. 안드레 인주산에 난 저저잖아 가서. My personality is such that the way I think about things is that endless talking is no good. It's not going to get the job done. And at some point, after there's been enough talking, you just have to do it. And that's how I feel about the Bikshuni ordination and about other things too. There's been, as I said, a great deal of discussion of the validity of the reestablishment of this ordination, and as I've also said, I'm very appreciative of all of that discussion and exploration. But I think now is the time to just do it. We have a yearly gathering called the Kaju Winter Dharma Gathering, a tradition of our particular lineage. And during these, we've discussed the issue of the Bikshuni ordination. And I've explained it, introduced the concept, and the Sangha, including the Kempo, the abbots and preceptors and others, have been very enthusiastic. And what they said to me is, you need to do it. They've pointed out that regardless of how much longer we spent discussing this amongst all the different masters of all the different schools, it's unlikely that we would ever arrive at a truly unanimous consensus. And so they pointed out that, I need to lead the way. Someone has to do it first, and then the others will follow. So I felt very encouraged by this. And so I agreed to do it. Last year I stated this publicly. So the actual administration, first conferral of the Bikshuni ordination will occur in 2016, because it takes several steps. Before receiving the Bikshuni vow, a woman must first receive the Shamanarika, or novitiate, a monastic vow, and then after that, the intermediate vow. I don't know what that is in Sanskrit, Galopma. Shikshamana? Oh, okay. Thank you. And then they have to hold that vow for 2 years before they can receive the Bikshuni vow. Then they have to remain a Bikshuni in good standing for 10 years before they can then go on to confer it. So since even if we begin this in 2016, I'll be 40 before any Tibetan women will be able to give the Bikshuni vows. If we were to wait much longer, I would be getting old, so I think it's time to do it.
다 도바 주당 거 시엔 지단 도바 주당 거래야 되는 커뮤니티를组建 아니 고주 뇌에다 가라신디 마음반 후견을 비기 체시지다 아니 분명히 저기 마음배기다 스지다 채통다 데들 저에 비비인데 you're very careful some of the very detail 제과지 마도 디디 미래를 일지 다 지야지 멤버 인주스다 아니 커뮤니티를组建 고주응원에 얘네들 가져라듯이 냠도 다디 경험도 너무 주당고 디주고 주당 줄로 간지에 메디탈이미나 지가서에 계제시과 지당 시과데 계좀 자대요래 다이나 지당 경험에 주당들이야다 탑시를 니 예배소지 직대 배배기 경험 파서 코너를 되는 주야지 이나한테 되게 쉬운 날인데 잡아지는 녀르지 마음발이야 아니 잡아진 차서나 하고 용마로 다들 니버티 가라서나 아 담마고도 트레디션 somewhere 야나게 아니 추송 대회 결혼마 게 아니 분명히 druge베게다 동바 탐지 결혼메게 대 추송메 대회 결혼말 되는 주
안 타몽 의식 개롱 매기 동바디 안 추송 대베 개롱 마다 다 다는 시탐지 여버면 개롱 파이기 그래서 아니 가수에 파소 니냠도 좀네 아니 대안로지 근데 제미나 다 타마데 가르쳐 안 그러자 출기 팅성하는 다데 가르쳐나 디 동바디 다 시탐지 여버면 동바지 차 그래서 다마 겁다 그 동바만 임베체 시탐지 여버면 그 동바 차라기 다 저아르지 데레 다 가르쳐나 배셔나 가르쳐나 동바디 가네 통거래라 동바디 다 가르쳐야지 조디 파이긴들 토고 예배 인두산에 안디 시탐지 여버만 얘기 아니 가르쳐 동준 저비지 파지 차노스레스 안디르지 다디 출기인지 다디 알았어 안디르 간다 드르지 다도 디테일하다 망고 싶지 않아 다 가시 디테일 가시 디 럽도 먼저와 디테일 디시다 가시지 시에 좀 이렇게 저렇지
There are a lot of aspects to this process, and we've created a committee we want to create a committee to explore and determine the procedure for the Bhikshuni ordination in very precise detail, so that when it is given, it is fully authentic, and that eventually it can become a glorious and independent tradition that will last. There appear to be two ways in which the Bhikshuni ordination can be given. One way is where all stages of the Bhikshuni ordination are given by a male bhikshu, a preceptor, and sangha. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are debates about the validity of that. The second way is where there is somewhat drawn from the Dharmaguptaka Bhikshuni lineage, which of course still continues, and that in that tradition, all of the preparatory or procedures and ordinations prior to or preliminary to the Bhikshuni ordination would be given by a Bhikshuni, and then the final Bhikshuni ordination would be given by a convened Sangha, including both male bhikshus of the Mula Sarvastivadin tradition, which, remember, is the lineage, the Bhikshuni vow lineage we wish to reestablish, and female bhikshunis from, in some cases, from the Dharmagupta, initially from the Dharmaguptaka tradition. In a sense, that is a little tricky, because what the vow that we want to reestablish is the Mula Sarvastivadin one. But since the implication of the text seems to be that the actual bhikshuni, the final bhikshuni vow, is transmitted by the bhikshu, attending bhikshu preceptor, and since the bhikshu preceptor in that case would be a bhikshu of the Mula Sarvastivadin tradition, I think that this is okay. Now, there are more details about this, but then we're getting into matters that you're not supposed to talk about to people who are not monastics.
Thank you so much for that detailed, very, very detailed account. It's very interesting, and I want to say we're listening to something very, very historical right now, and it's amazing that we can see the care and the high level of research and thought that is going into this very, very complicated but very important process. And so I really, really appreciate you told us a great deal of detail about that. And I just would like to open to some of the students who might like to have some questions about that. Or anyone in the faculty, please. Yes. Chris.
Yes. I have a question. You said that
you're initiating kind of educational programs to familiarize Tibetan nuns with the value of Bikshuni ordination. Is there a corresponding kind of educational program for bhikkhus to realize what the value of that equal status is? Because it seems like there might be resistance from different sectors of the community.
지당게 베나타 신다당 예시에 통만다 이미데 다 지 가만 감상성으로 다시 추주디 다 가서 나로래야 정말 잡죠시니 참에 잡죠 예데 마도 텔레 지 가서에 제고래서 나래야 슈갸 마도데 제고 말했으니지 그지 매매서 드지시 상으로 왜 서포트 다나신 딘딘 예계시에 걸려야 주마 지부만 봐. 저 주니가로야. 어디시가래. 아니지 결혼만 사대 계신 분 이미인데. 다디 얘는 비디스게 결혼만 계신 분 이미인데 딘사지 지기에게 배배 안에 쓰기 깨자자 디 계신 사서 말았어. 오만 계신 분 했어. 사기 된바 아주 코르는 시스템도 사네. 통만에 아주는 유지시스가 아래 상계 지den도 쳐발려다 그런 상계 지den도 전거하게 금생 카시지 시가 디나 지티 그런 넘버시 주야디 에네 상계 지den도 전거 금생을 지 시가 아래 자자 디 금생대네 당분은 개체부 인인버지 다 이미는 나중에 디 결혼은 dungyang chemoto bade ngaju nunju doji ajuda rodo chong samye pomo samye ta 가서 그러다 nunju 사람은 교회 사람다 nunju 사람이 아무나 당아서 이지 만당만 되지도 사도 말해 이제 내 돈에 어제디 이가로 쳐야 돼 주문 정도 맞아서 잡아서 제가 한 참에디 고쳐야지 엔지스 야버를 줘서 선물을 드리는
Well, I can't speak for others, but I can say that everybody in my lineage, in our lineage, has been extremely supportive of both women and men of this, and naturally so, without me pushing. I have presented the importance and value of the Bikshuni ordination to both female and male monastics. And I've pointed out, and they seem very appreciative of the fact, that it is not like it just became important recently because Western Tibetan Buddhist female monastics have asked for it. It always was important. And one of the reasons why it's so important is from the beginning we defined the Sangha as the fourfold entourage of the Buddha. The male and female monastics and male and female laity, and if they're not, if that's incomplete, then this, we don't have the full entourage. But that's just one reason. And I've also tried to point out that it should have continued. It is we are at fault for having allowed it to lapse in the first place. And in response to this, I've been greeted with great enthusiasm from everyone. La. Yeah, lamas. Karel.
상계
Korshi.
문제기 좀 상계 지den도 전교회 균세
라서.
다 가시 시야야 찍디 코로나 버시
라서.
상회 제도 어느 상계 다 간단 저버리는 전발에서 기지 좋아다.
라서.
다 간단 상계 전과 균세지디 코로나 비 상하체도.
라서.
코로나 비 남지
It's said that one of the reasons that brought the Buddha into this world is so that the fourfold entourage be complete. So if the fourfold entourage is not complete, the fourfold Sangha, then we're not honoring one of the major reasons why the Buddha appeared here to begin with.
남바 상계 비 계급 이면사데 코르 남바시 예메 테라타 공개 소르시다 tindeji 차디아레스.
To the point where traditionally Buddhists would define a Buddhist land or country as a place where the 4 types of Sangha are all represented or present. And if they're not, it's not.
I've heard His Holiness mention that this reinstatement is linked to the Buddhist teaching of interdependence. And so if you could expand on that.
다디 간들 나온다. 지당기 가수에 지금 전부링 민보로 차는 제비나다 봄에디 데즈지 망아요 그렇지. 가자. 딱 봄에 망고해 봐. 아니 봄에 나는지 최냐면 책에 망고해 봐. 최를 대바치니 최리야 지 인트레스트니 spiritual part 인트레스트니 답하지 파데는 불에 마스를 써서도 오늘 망고해면 다 장가제 규로 다드네 다나 신기 안드레 인주사네 디즈기 고바강과 고솔이야 아는 아즈기 에너지 가르다 spiritual leadership 베타네 아는 고솔이야 에너지 가르지 공고 가려야 마당 고솔 다다지 만당와 섬으로베 지 의심 퐁베 내단 가려야 봐 야지 공고 가려야 봐디 다시 시작해야지 당 고주 거바강 와야지 당아주 연결을 창리하래 이 디규전 제게 더 인터벤션 커넥션 이제 그 토안에 에는 간다 가수야지 아주 땡땡기 따딜이야 지 토나 첨부 시작해야지 쉽지 개첨부지 자디하래 다는 주시 다는 신기 에는 분명히 미세다 분명히 싫어고 정신선한 장도 다나지 보면은 참지는 신 뉴바여의 인두산에 되게 미세게 지도 나올려야 leadership 미세 분명히 토는 leadership 제토야 뉴바지여의 인두산 디균전되는 고술에 가지고 되게 Buddhist highest 가지고 다지 되게 다지 스지당 되게 체동으로지 내가 와디 개좀 쉽지 않게 여러 선택이 있어.
To speak generally, it seems that there are more women than men, more female humans than male humans. And especially, while I haven't counted, there seem to be more women interested in spirituality than men. One of the responsibilities of any spiritual leader is to determine the needs of those they serve, especially what they lack, what they need that they're not getting, and to respond to that. So in that sense of interdependence, I think the reestablishment of the Bikshuni ordination is of tremendous importance. Another thing is that women are often said to be of the nature of wisdom inherently. And one of the implications of this is that women often have a tremendous innate ability to lead, leadership ability. And therefore, to have great Bhikshuni spiritual leaders in the Buddhist tradition would do Buddhism a tremendous amount of good.
I should be late? Yes. I am trying to shift the topic to another area. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has done a tremendous job in neuroscience and neurology.
Yes.
Can you tell us what inspired him in that direction, and also tell where will you take it further?
Mind and Life conference that Delia ta tinkashi renewye 제상 알아내 로종을 망고시다 대해서 하는 마신에 군중게 지 여름치 다인지민지 연구를 했는데 interest ngaji wo marta kanda azugi 주고 나신 선물 다디 그래서 라고 다디지 디스 가르래 아주지 주고 나신 왕보지 강수 사회지 도나체오래 송제 아니 사하시 전유에 다디 사실 자동도 가라서 마인드 라이브디 로케이션디 시프트 제제 안 장로서도 아마 자몽나 인자한테 장로서디 그들이나 저도면도 시험은 남기 다람 사이에는 어다 드리체 비슷하네 나라네지 미세지 체리 내 도나를 두시에 체리 로그로 디치게 베게처지 안드리 비슷하네 겨울치기에 다 공시 전부 나지 들이야 간다라 공에 망부시켜베 비슷한 땡땡 아정외네 그냥 디기 지가르에 제바칠레기 죽으로 장제 제가 데이터 맞을 게 붙이거든요 트레이닝.
Well, I've learned a little bit about neuroscience from attending the several Mind Life conferences at the strong encouragement of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has encouraged not only me but many of the younger tulkus to attend these conferences and to learn as much as possible about science in general and neuroscience in particular. I'm no longer able to attend them as the location has shifted from Dharamsala to southern India. But I'm very interested in science, and I think that as we can see by the example of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it is our responsibility to study it and to take part in this research.
Your Holiness, I have a question regarding to our Bikuni tradition, and according to the Vinaya, bhikkhus could leave and return back to the Sangha order 7 times. And when, yes, what do you think, would you put that into consideration?
Okay.
Thanks.
다디 에시에다 갈아가고 싶다. 디디 지당기 당보 루주셰비미나. 나 당보디 미세게 지시를 개매하죠. 당보 다지여와 당보 동바슈 나라바피 미자샤 나 동바슈 제저와 당보디 지시 유저만에.
알았어.
같이 제조셔.
알았어.
이나 상기 qab리야 게롬마지기. 다 소리다 게롬마지레다. 뭔가 뭐는 지기로다.
알았어.
중니 제샤라 잘 중니.
야?
잘 중니 제샤디사 좀 맞지지라.
알았어.
내가 제초했다. 아드레인두산 다 디제라 제초금 차르직마도 제초금에서지 이셔야래.
알았어.
다이나 다디 서지 야사데 데스 카고 인기라서 그거 서로들라.
알았어.
가레사나 디 상기 룰디 비나 룰디 서지 야사데 다 지당기 상기 송야래. 가르에 상기 군양에 만대 거냐 군거려 마음바리아지 라우드 쇼에 데드조 강에 충분입니다. 라바 친지다 처음부터 방향차고 라바 춘춘티들이야. 라바 춘춘티 디스 방향체 고향체 거래서.
알았어.
다이네디 라바 춘춘디 가리미 될 줘봐야. 가서 군거유디 상계라 좋아디 세버지 머슈 인장. 전에 다 제디 컨트로버셜을 차지다. 라바 친지들 가래스다.
알았어.
간에 가라바 친지들이서 저러다. 야 마테 상상도 야테 상상. 다 간다야 직시하나 직 대한 딱 게롱 뒤에 나로야 게롱 데디 계속 줍차데 커뮤니티디 계속 줍차리 인자 커뮤니티 토안에 주루루 체지 계절을 시하면로 시하마다 남이 직시해도 하스게.
It's hard for me to say. I don't think this is something that I as an individual can resolve. Actually, if you go back to the the origins of the rules governing reordination after a lapse or after surrendering the vows and then seeking reordination. In the beginning, there was no limit stated, but then a bhikshuni retook ordination 12 times, and it was pronounced that that was just too much. That was too many times. So then it was limited to one time for bhikshunis. Since that is in the Vinaya, it's very, very hard for us to actually change the rules or regulations that the Buddha himself set forth in the Vinaya. Now, there are grounds for doing so in some cases, because before his parinirvana, the Buddha said to Ananda, in the future, if they cause problems for the Sangha of bhikshus and bhikshunis, very minor regulations can be let go or can be eased. Minor regulations can be eased. The problem how we face is that Ananda did not ask the Buddha, Tathagata, will you please define what constitutes a minor regulation? So we don't know exactly where the borderline is between what the Buddha intended Ananda to understand as minor regulations and more serious or major regulations. Since, however, in the Vinaya, the community is of a great importance, I think it best that this be resolved, is powerful. I think it be best that this be resolved in a communal discussion.
Last one? Your Holiness, I come from Bangladesh, where people talk a lot about Atisha Dipankara Srijana. Unfortunately, very few people know actually what Atisha has written, because most of the things are developed in Tibetan. So one of the things that I'm doing here is I'm learning Tibetan so that I could read these original texts. So my question is, recently, a few days ago, the Dalai Lama has met members of the Sri Lankan Sangha for the first time, it seems, in 800 years or so. So what do you think in terms of collaborating between or within these different Buddhist traditions so that we can learn more about each other?
조지 반대 드셔야 별 관심 좀이야 가수니까 거지 좀 싶으시다 별 관심 좀 상기 때만 지 가수에다 지 님만좀 차대요 거 때만 가수지 장소니 선물도 되지 거지 좀 차대요래 아니지 거유 차샤위 다고 거유 차샤위 미나 다지 가차 조 소리스 비슷하네. 민들이 아마 마귀대베기 차가시 뷰 당하다. 안에 조지는 마귀대베 까담비 당하니 손제가 토하냐면나. 다버도 지 가르에다 냠내 조로디 튜모 냠내 조로디 하지 까담 나이스래. 인지사네. deep connection somewhere 주주에 되는 도스래. 근데 디사 아주 방아대시다 중국 망보지 유네 에너지 가수에 배나 조지기 구충설에 다나신기 조지기 관발에 안네 대성도 마세비 즉 델로바 충설에 다디디 지 셰도 중앙 고급을 중등 아예 지시다 개발 상황을 가보시다 도스 아니 인도사는 망발이야 다지 다가 벽에 토리아 유에데베기 에너지 가서다 조직 제샤베기 대주디수 아니 방갈리게 토리아 바 지가주 교투나 아니 야부시지 저거만 선들을지 저도 마싱에 방갈리 개버지 아마 드레 아주 배주치야데 계속면로 나는 정 아주 재산 드레게 제베 토네 조지에디 딱 간다 베베다 베바다 방라데시 니게기 딱 간다 튜몽기 지대하러 저기에 인도산 진짜기 토안에 아주 빈준 잘람체네 안 돌린치아 당기시아 리총리는 아버지지 자대면서 다 간다 공 브리지는 잘하고 다 상반도지 디 첩시든 자마 매매 돈에 근데직 돈에 제 첩시 저 잠깐 하고
As you no doubt know, Atisha was of tremendous kindness. Lord Atisha was of tremendous kindness to Tibet. He renewed the Dharma there, and he, especially our tradition, the Kagyu tradition is a combination of the lineage of Atisha and the lineage of Milarepa, which were combined into two. The two streams were combined into one by Lord Gampopa, called the combination of the Kadampa and Mahamudra traditions. And practically speaking, our emphasis in practice for most of us really is the Kadampa teachings of Lord Atisha. So therefore, it's tremendously precious to all of us that his birthplace and the monastery where he resided, as well as the birthplace of the Mahasiddha Tilopa and so on, have been identified and are being venerated. I think one thing that could happen is if the writings of Atisha were translated into Bengali from Tibetan by scholars, that would be a tremendous benefit, because Atisha, being a common treasure for the people of Bangladesh and the people of Tibet, he could form a bridge between the Buddhism of the one and the Buddhism of the other. We have to make this, of course, free from any kind of political flavor.
Please, everyone stay seated. I want to thank again for the very, very detailed account. We can see it's a legal matter, it's a human matter, it's an interpretation matter, and it's really, really impressive to see how you are handling. I want to say, really, you're a great leader, and we very much respect you.